What's going on, guys? Tim Roswick here, and today I want to talk about something that I really adapted from the startup world into game development because I think it's so relevant to the way that we make games. And I see a lot of people that are terrified of failing. And I want to point out that in my life, I look at failure, the only real failure is quitting. Like, the only way to really fail at something and never get anywhere is just to stop doing it. But what a lot of people don't realize is what they consider as failures aren't really failures. They're not really that, because the only way to really fail is quitting. But when you talk about a failure, they usually mean like putting a game out and it not doing so well, or building a mechanic and the mechanic doesn't work, or trying to create a game that they can't quite make yet. And if those are called failures, then I think the mindset that they should adapt is to fail faster. I know for me, when I started out in game development, one of the things that I always wanted to avoid was failure. Like, no matter what, I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to be able to not create something that I wanted to create. I didn't want to put out something that no one liked. I didn't want to create a mechanic that just didn't work in my game. And I was so scared of that for so long that I ended up not doing a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do because I was scared to fail. Especially in a public setting, like when you release your game and you have people on a forum or in a Facebook group or whatever, and there are people out there that are going to be seeing this stuff, it's really embarrassing to fail in public. And it can seem terrifying, especially to an introvert like me. Like, the last thing I want is a bunch of people looking at me, pointing at me and say, aha, he's a failure. But I realized a lot of those fears were completely unfounded. And I realized for me to actually be successful at what I wanted to do, I learned that you have to fail faster. And I learned this in the startup world when I was working on my company. But also I was networking with a lot of startup companies, a lot of really cool people. I had an office down in Santa Monica that was a couple blocks from the beach. And it was a shared office space, which means there were literally hundreds of companies in these little blocks all over. And there was an open workspace area where people could just kind of come in and rent the whole space for a couple $100 a month. And they would just have access to all the different offices and workspaces and Wi-Fi and all that stuff. And it was the coolest thing ever because there was all these great companies. There was so many people to network with. Like, right down the hall from me was the co-founder of Activision, and that dude's a billionaire, and he was just in an office sitting there chilling. So there were so many cool people that I got to meet, and I started kind of getting involved in this whole startup culture and the lean startup idea, the philosophy behind it. And a lot of these guys that build these major tech companies, a lot of them adapt this concept of failing faster. Rather than avoiding failure and being terrified of it, whatever you're going to do wrong, try and do it as fast as you can and then learn from it. Because the number one thing that you get from those experiences of not being able to create something or making something that doesn't work or any of that is you learn. You learn what doesn't work. There's an old quote from Thomas Edison about how he hadn't failed 1,000 times on building a light bulb. He only found 1,000 ways that didn't work. So he got closer to finding the one that did. That's how this stuff works. Every time you fail, there's something that you can learn from that failure. So if you want to accelerate your learning, you got to fail faster. You got to make more shit. You got to push shit out constantly, over and over and over, constantly be building, constantly be iterating, and see what works and see what doesn't. And this concept is so overlooked in game development because I have read so many blog posts, so many personal things from developers, so many tweets where it's just like they're either completely afraid to fail or they look at their game as a failure. Like, the whole concept of a post-mortem, like, don't even get me started on that. Like, when people post those and they're just talking about, oh, these are all things we did wrong, blah, 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 and they just look at themselves as a failure, like, no, you've learned all these things. Like, don't frame it that way. Like, share the things that you've learned and really learn from them, because it's such a great opportunity to go through something that doesn't work. It teaches you so much. Like, I had a mentor that was the VP of a company that I worked for a long time. And this company was fucking chaos, right? I didn't really work for them, but I was like an outside contractor, but I would come into the office to work with them on their marketing and stuff. And the thing that I learned so much from that chaotic, freaking crazy company was he would always bring me aside and say, Tim, this isn't how a real company works. These people are all just crazy. And I love that so much from it. Like, it seriously stuck with me so much, because watching all these people do all these things wrong, watching these people talk to clients wrong, watching these people make promises that they couldn't keep, watching these people do all these crazy shit taught me way more than doing the right thing ever did. Because I learned, you know what, that's not how I want to run business. You know what, that's not how I want to talk to people. You know what, that's not how I want to like live my life. And failure can teach you that faster than anything else can. And the great thing about failure is the bigger the failure, the bigger the lesson. Some of my like core concepts in my head that really dictate how I run my life have come from some of my biggest failures. When I went broke, right? There was a point in time where I was literally quite nearly homeless, and I had to choose between feeding myself and feeding my dog. And that, being at that point and making the decisions that got me there, taught me so much about how to make future decisions and how to do things and really understand that stuff. Like, especially like that specific situation taught me a ton about finance. That's when I started reading a whole bunch about personal finance and about having a security fund and all this stuff. And like, it just, failure seriously teaches you more than success ever can. And that's why, like, so many successful games that you see, so many of the game developers that are on top, they're the dudes that have made a series of shitty games. Like Angry Birds had the developers of Angry Birds, Rovio, they made, I think, something in the neighborhood of like 40 to 50 games before they made Angry Birds. And Angry Birds is a $1 billion franchise now. No one knows what other games they made. No one knows what, like, no one can name any of those fucking games because they were probably all failures. But having that consistent process and really learning from each one of those can help you so much in life. And that's why I really truly believe in the concept of failing faster, because the faster you can fail, the faster you can learn. And I think it takes the pressure off of yourself too, as, oh my God, I have to do this thing and it has to succeed, blah blah blah. Like your brain just like gets so set on that, and then there's so much pressure, so much anxiety, and you forget things and you do things wrong, and it's a wrong place to go. Because especially like if this is your side job, right? Like you don't really have to worry about that pressure of like, if you don't make money for the rent off of this game, like you're gonna go out, like you're gonna be homeless. Like, you have the luxury of being able to fail a lot and failing quickly, and you can learn so much from that. If you're in that position, obviously, you know, you made the decisions to get there, so maybe there's other lessons there. But I think you can always pull off everything that you want to pull off, but you look at failures as lessons. And every time I've failed in life, I've realized that there was always a lesson to be learned. And once I learn that lesson, I don't ever make the same mistake, so I don't get in the same position. And it's helped me over and over and over again in game development, especially because there's so many things that you learn about the intricacies of design or user experience, or like, you know, all this stuff. I'll never forget one time I had someone play my game on Twitch, and it was the first time anybody had ever played my game besides me, and they couldn't even figure out how to play the game live on Twitch stream in front of 100 people. I learned my lesson there, right? Like, I learned my lesson. Not gonna happen again. I'm definitely gonna figure out all the UX and user experience issues before anyone plays my game live for an audience. But there's so many things like that that just like, they seem so simple in hindsight, but you don't learn until you fail. And again, like the harder you fail, like I failed in front of hundreds of people live on Twitch. That lesson was so much more ingrained in my brain than had I just give it to someone and they can't figure it out at like a Starbucks or something. It really ingrained it in my brain, and I'm never going to make that mistake again. I'm always going to work on the experience and the UI, the UX, all that stuff to make sure that people understand how to play. So I hope the basic concept of this got through to you. I hope you understand the concept of fail faster, and I hope you can apply it in your games, in your life, to hopefully get further in what you want to do in game development. So that's it for this video. If you guys have any comments or you want to share your story about how you failed and you learned something from it, I'd love to hear from you. Leave it in the comments below. Once again, I'm Tim Roswick. I will see you guys in the next video.